Happy August, everyone. You've landed in the Talking to Myself podcast. Just so you know, I'm Carol L. Paur, your host. The weather has been cooler here in southeast Wisconsin, unlike a lot of areas in this world having heat waves. It was 50 degrees this morning. I don't like it when it gets too cool too early in the summer because we start our tomatoes really late and they need hot weather, not cold. And I don't like green tomatoes. Do you have a garden? My husband does the vegetables. I do flowers and weeds. I don't like weeding. I just put more mulch on the ground to cover the weeds. That's a terrible way to garden, but it's the truth. August is the time I start thinking about county fairs because the county I live in, Walworth County, has its fair near the end of August. Lots of counties have fairs all summer long, but since I live in this area, that is what I think about. Have you ever been to a fair? Maybe you've been to the state fair. There are a lot of county fairs that are taking place all summer long. Have you ever displayed or showed anything at the fair? I decorated a cake once. It took second place. I showed my jars of pickles. Those two took only second. I don't think I've ever gotten a blue ribbon or a grand champion. Our daughters have been in 4-H, and they showed their different items at the fair. We don't live on a farm, and we don't have any animals. So the things they did, were like food preservation, cake decorating, sewing, arts and crafts, and photography. It was a great learning experience. There's a lot to enjoy and learn at the fair. I grew up in a small town and didn't know much about farming or animals. I figured when you got milk at the store, that's where it all came from. Now, I knew it came from cows, but I married a dairy farmer, so I learned more about the whole dairy process. And when you go to the fair, you learn a lot too, especially in Wisconsin. The idea of fairs started a long time ago, probably back in ancient times. Then there were the medieval fairs, and they had sort of a religious background. But I'm not really going to get into the history of fairs because my special guest has written a book about the history of fairs. It's called Meet Me on the Midway, A History of Wisconsin Fairs. The author is Jerry Apps, who is also our special guest. Jerry has written 35 books. He's been a professor at UW-Madison, has been involved with 4-H, and he's been on television. He's won countless awards, and he blogs weekly. I hope he doesn't mind me telling you he is in his 80s. Jerry has agreed to do a phone interview, so we chatted a few days ago. Please listen now to my interview with Jerry Apps, the author of Meet Me on the Midway, A History of Wisconsin Fairs. All right, so I went on your website. I had no idea you were on PBS or that you were a college professor or you've written 35 books. So I'm just for a little background, could you just give us a little of your history of, what you've done, who you are, for my listeners?
Sure. I'm a farm boy. Grew up on a farm west of Wild Rose, Wisconsin, in Waushara County, back in the midst of the Great Depression. I'm a product of a one-room country school. I spent 8 years in one, and I graduated from Wild Rose High School way back in 1951. At that time, almost no one went on to college, and I was privileged to receive a scholarship, and I paddled off to the University of Wisconsin in Madison with a scholarship that would pay most of my tuition for one semester. It was $62.50. Makes one chuckle today when you hear what tuitions are.
Right.
I went on to graduate from UW-Madison. I spent some time in the Army. That was during the Korean War. I did not have to serve in combat, but I did spend 10 years in the Army Reserve, reaching the rank of captain. I taught at I was an extension agent for 5 years, meaning that I helped with the organization of fairs. I worked in Green Lake County for 2.5 years, and I worked in Brown County, which is Green Bay, for 2.5 years. And then came to move to Madison and was a publications editor for the state 4-H office for a few years before I went back to school and finished my graduate degrees and became a professor where I taught at UW-Madison and the College of Ag and Life Sciences for 30 years. I started writing, freelance writing, in 1966, where I wrote columns for several newspapers, receiving the outstanding payment of $5 per column. And for each column, I also had to submit a photograph, so I was doing both freelance photography as well as freelance writing. And I did that for 10 years. And I consider that today, when I look back at it, as my apprenticeship in writing, because some of the columns were awful, but some of them were pretty good. And as it turned out, both the awful and the pretty good columns were all published, and that allowed me to develop a bit of an audience for understanding some of the history of rural America. Because the niche in my writing, as I continued to write, and I wrote my first book in 1970, can you believe it? My niche is rural America, and especially small towns and farms. And I continue to do that. My books focus on that topic.
How come?
Well, there's an interesting story behind that, and quickly I'll tell it. When I arrived in Madison as a country boy who grew up without electricity, indoor plumbing, any of the things we take for granted these days, I arrived in Madison scared to death. I didn't know a soul here. And one day, one of the first days I was here, my roommate at the university and I went off to find something to eat. And as we were walking down University Avenue, he said, "Jerry, you walk just like you're behind a plow." And I said, "Well, that's what I was doing just a couple of days ago." And I vowed on that day that I was going to learn how to walk city. And so I practiced. I watched people. How stupid does this sound? I watched people walking down University Avenue, and within a few weeks, I thought I could walk city as well as the next.
Wow, okay.
And lo and behold, 4 years later, after I graduated, I was in the Army, and I'm in Fort Eustis, Virginia, and with other second lieutenants. And I'm hearing their stories of growing up in New York and in Baltimore and Detroit and places like that. And I thought, I have been stupid and trying to be somebody that I was not.
Right.
And I thought, by golly, my experiences on the farm were special. And that's true of everyone else who grew up on a farm. And so I vowed on that day, one of those days, that I would spend my career, if I had one ahead of me, helping farm people take charge of their own lives and tell their stories and share them with others and not be ashamed.
Right.
As some rural people were, as some farm kids were, as I was, and growing up on a farm because it was special. And so I have tried through my books, through my television work, and I do a lot of radio work, to cover that, to work on that theme, to
Sure.
help people understand that rural people, they're not better than I'm trying
Excellent.
to help everyone. Rural people be proud of themselves, urban people to better understand
Excellent. Yeah, that's
rural
great.
America.
Great. Okay, so I didn't get the book because they didn't have it at the library, but I did get to read first couple chapters of the Meet Me on the Midway, A History of Wisconsin Fairs, and it looks like a great book. Um, so you talked about the rural, living the rural life and telling the story. Why did you write Meet Me on the Midway?
Well, by the time I had written about the county and state fairs, I had already written the history of Wisconsin agriculture. I've written farming with horses.
Sure.
I've written about one-room country schools, etc. I had not written about fairs, directly at least. And I am a product of someone who has grown up with fairs. As a 4-H member, I showed cattle at the Washera County Fair and at the State Fair back in the 40s and 50s. So I talked with my editor at the Wisconsin Historical Society Press, Kate Thompson, and she said, there might be some interest in that. And so I went ahead, and it took me a couple of years to research it. But to me, that was a part of my history.
How have fairs stayed the same, but how are they different today in 2022?
Well, obviously in 1938, there was even a lot of fairs didn't have electricity yet.
Oh wow!
And the first fair that I went to, I was just a little kid with my dad. It had elements of sameness to what we see today. And the Midway was there, but the Midway was very different. The entertainment, I didn't get to see that, of course, as a little kid. But the changes that have taken place is the fairs that have been successful, and there are a few that dropped out along the way, not many, but a few that didn't make it, have kept up with the times. What does that mean? Well, they moved from horse pulling contests to tractor pulling contests.
Okay.
In other words, they kept up with the technological times, so to speak.
Sure.
I bet corn was displayed when open pollinated corn had been popular in 1938. They were one of the examples really of hybrids at that time. So fairs have kept up, but they haven't, and you said this before, they have not tried to be glitzy about it. They tried to be accurate, and they're keeping up to date with what's going on. And it was, again, a way for the urbanites to see what agriculture is like at this time, when technology and the internet and all this sort of thing. One of the ways you can tell is to look at the 4-H exhibits. When I was in 4-H, there wasn't anything that related to the internet because there wasn't such a thing.
Right.
In fact, when I first started showing at the fair, there wasn't such a thing as television. I saw the first television in 1948.
Wow.
There in Milwaukee. Came home and said to my dad, I saw this thing called television. I think it's a fad. Never going to make it. How wrong I was, well.
That's funny. That's really funny. Okay. Yeah, and I think you make a great point because, like you're talking about the tractors, and I know like the milking machines and stuff. So it's the technology for farming changes or agriculture. The fairs, they show those changes. Then that's what you meant by keeping up with the times, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Shout out thank you to Jerry Apps for being so patient as we worked out the sound and recording for this show. You can purchase his book online or at a local bookstore. Check out Jerry's website at jerryapps.com. All his books and other activities are listed there. He also has a Facebook page. Just go to Facebook and look for Jerry Abs. Are you going to the fair? If you're going to the Walworth County Fair, I'll be selling cream puffs on one of the nights. I want to go check out that Foreigner concert. I am going to take time to look at all those animals and check out all those 4-H exhibits along with the open class exhibits. I think people put a lot of work into these projects and they want people to look at them. In the meantime, I'll be at the Pretzel Literary Festival in Freeport, Illinois on Saturday, August 27th from 10 to 2. I'll also be at the Art in the Park Author Fair, which will be at the Swiss Church New Glarus in New Glarus, Wisconsin. That's on Sunday, September 4th, and it starts at 10 o'clock until 3. So if you're out in New Glarus, come on out and say hi. Then we'll be having our wonderful Rotary Festival on Saturday, September 24th at Condon Gardens in Delavan. I won't be selling books on that day. I'll just be too busy running around, helping and working and all that stuff. My husband and I will be going on a cruise this September. We're celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary. I'll still have a show. Make sure you check in. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and share. Cheers.